Hello everyone, welcome to another ODNT Spotlight. I'm your host, Steve DeWinter. Oh my goodness, that's a problem with our live recording here. If I mess up, and I mess up on my own name, but I'm not going to do that for our wonderful guest today, author Guy Donovan. And he, in a past life, was an animator and storyboard artist, and he worked for Marvel Films, Hanna-Barbera, Sony Pictures, DreamWorks SKG, Warner Brothers Feature Animation. He did all this wonderful stuff, but fortunately for us, in his new life, he is an author. And so that's why we have him here on the show. And he is here promoting his Dragon's Treasure trilogy, of which the first book and the second book are both out. So the first book is called The Forgotten Princess of Mona. And that book is already out. And then just this past October, so less than a month ago now, A Cold White Home, which is book 2 in the Dragon's Treasure trilogy, is already out. So let's go ahead and let's switch on over and let's say hi to Guy. Hi, Guy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, thank you so very much for coming on. So tell us what your Dragon's Treasure trilogy story is all about.
In a nutshell, it basically takes place during the 5th century in post-Roman Britannia. The Romans have left probably 30, 40 years prior to the beginning of my story, and it takes place in the power vacuum left behind. The Romans, of course, converted to Christianity in the 3rd century. So there's been about 2 centuries or so of Christianity within the Roman influence. But when they leave, that leaves a lot of disenfranchised pagan groups behind to try to fill that power gap. Plus, there's the ancestral enemies of the Romans, the Picts, that are still north of Hadrian's Wall. And, of course, they're pagan as well. And now they're a little more free to operate as they'd like. So the core of the story is that it takes place on the western limits of Britannia in what will eventually become Wales. And my protagonist is a little 11-year-old girl named Cerys. I want to stress that. It's spelled C-E-R-Y-S, but the C in Gaelic languages is always the hard C. So it's Cerys, not Ceres. At any rate, Cerys is a little bit of an issue herself because she is the princess of the Kingdom of Mona, which is located on a Welsh island that today is known as Anglesey. It's where Prince Philip flew his helicopters off of. No, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Prince
Isn't that
Andrew,
his name?
right, yes.
Whatever. I get them all.
One of those guys.
One of those guys. Yeah. Well, it's a real island. It's known as Anglesey now, but in Welsh, it's Ynys Môn, which is where the term Mona derives from. At any rate, she is the orphaned daughter. Mother died in giving birth, which was so common back then. Her mother was the queen. Father, Talarcan, was forced to marry another woman by the High King of Britannia, which is, in this book, the historical figure of Vortigern, who precedes Uther Pendragon.
Oh, interesting.
All right. So, but the problem with Cerys is that in the process of being born, she suffered some oxygen deprivation, and in today's world, she would be known as autistic.
Oh.
In the 5th century, however, they have less glowing terms like simple-minded, moron, yeah, all that lovely stuff.
You're not normal.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, she's been kind of cast off to the side, and the new queen's son has been designated as the Prince Regent. He will take over the throne of Mona, not Cerys, which even in the 5th century, the oldest child would have.
Male
not
or
necessarily
female.
the male.
Right?
Absolutely. So she has been kind of cast aside, and she has limited mental faculties. She barely speaks at all. She has poor motor skills. She's in 5th century terms, she's a mess, and she's incapable of ever ruling. So she's just kind of a peripheral character in the court that really no longer cares for her, with the exception of her father. Now, unfortunately, her father disappears under mysterious circumstances when she is 10, the year before the story starts. So she is completely cast off to the side by her stepmother, that is now the queen, and she's not an evil stepmother.
I was about to say the evil stepmother.
No, she's not an evil stepmother. But she's got her own agenda, and this simple-minded stepdaughter of hers does not fit into that. So she's kind of cast off aside with the old advisor to the king, who is born a Pict, and he is raised in Wales himself, and his name is Domelc. So he is more or less Karis's tutor and caretaker, and he teaches her what he can. Things are looking pretty bleak for both of them. They're both just peripheral characters, and nobody really cares to have anything to do with them.
Shoved off in some small dark hole in the side of the kingdom.
Exactly. And Karis makes a discovery in a cave that changes all that. And her autism, to use the modern term, is gradually improving. And it's very mysterious as to how that happens, and it becomes a bit of a political threat, too, especially because she's raised pagan. She's incapable of higher understanding, so why bother? And she's left with her pagan roots. And the new Christian administration, the queen and her bishop, aren't caring for that a whole hell of a lot. So it becomes a political liability as well, and the secret behind what is curing that mental problem of hers is what, of course, winds up driving the story and where the title comes from.
Yes, the dragon's treasure.
The dragon's treasure. Yeah, there's a dragon in there. I hesitate to talk about it too much because it is a mysterious figure in that first book. But let's face it, it's in the title. I got to come clean. It's dragon, folks.
It's in your trilogy title. You've given it up already.
Pretty much, yeah.
So it sounds like you did. Did you do a lot of research into 5th century Wales, basically?
Yeah.
And all the surrounding area?
My wife is the one that kind of gave me the idea to do this myself. It's a pre-existing idea of hers in its origin. It's something completely different in what I did with it, but it was originally a spec script she wrote for Mattel as a Barbie direct-to-video feature.
Oh, interesting.
And her
what
concept
a weird world we live in,
isn't it? Her concept was that the princess was going to be named Isabel, and it was going to be set in a pseudo-French kingdom much later in the Middle Ages. I sat there thinking about it myself when because the spec script went nowhere, and she threw it back to me when I said, "Well, why don't you just adult that up a little bit and release it as a book?"
Right. She's like, "You do it."
Exactly. A little nicer than that, yes, but yeah, it was kind of like that. She just had no more interest in it and said, "Well, you're bored at work. Why don't you take that on?" I had for 7 or 8 years at that point been out of the entertainment industry, the animation industry, I guess, if you want to put the two together. I'd been out. I was bored out of my skull. My job did not involve any creativity at all. So I kind of leaped at the idea, to tell you the truth, but
you're like, yes.
So I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I eventually settled on, for probably the worst of possible reasons, Wales, because their flag has a red dragon on it.
Oh, you can't write this stuff sometimes.
Yeah, it seemed like it just fit, and coincidentally, I'm half Welsh myself. Welsh, Irish, English. The only British I don't have in me is Scottish. And knowing how the English were, there's probably some Scottish in there too. But the more I started looking into Wales, the more I realized it was really perfect. And the time period as well. It's such a nebulous time period in which really only the Roman scholars have any even semi-reliable information regarding it, because it spans the end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. So it's all shrouded in mystery, and this Roman historian claiming this, and another Roman historian claiming that, and they all post-date that period by as much as 400 years.
So it was either not written down or not kept. More likely not written down, right?
Pretty much, which gives me a lot of wiggle room.
This is true. So you did some research, what research you can.
Absolutely. And luckily, my family and I, my wife and my daughter, we were able to take a trip to Great Britain. And I had already largely written book 1 and planned out the arc of books 2 and 3. But then we went to Great Britain just shortly prior to self-publishing book one. And I got to actually go to all these places that I'd been visiting on Google and through the
Google Earth.
virtual world. And I actually got to go and see these real locations that I was writing about, and it was neat.
And it must be surreal because in your mind, all these things are happening at this place that probably didn't really happen in the real world, but for you, they're real.
Absolutely. Yeah, the characters all, I mean, like any other author, most of my characters are based on different aspects of myself. There's nothing new there.
Right.
And of course, the bad guys are all people I've worked with in the past and didn't get along well with.
Revenge!
A little bit of myself in there too as well. I admit that. I know about my darker side. But yeah, it was really neat to go to these locations. The Royal Manor of Mona actually did exist. It was not a royal manor. It was a Roman fort on the island of Innisgibby, which is now known as Holyhead. And the Roman fort's foundations are still there, and there's I think a 13th century church on that site. But the Roman wall still surrounds that church.
Wow.
And the seawall, the little low, like 4-foot tall seawall that I write Karis climbing over to get down onto the quay and through the water to go off at night when no one knows she's leaving the manor to go visit her dragon friend is really there. And my daughter and I have had the opportunity to sit on that seawall.
Oh, nice.
It's pretty neat, I gotta say.
That is awesome. So when you do your writing, it sounds like you do some outlining first.
Yeah, I don't know really what you'd call me. I'm not a pantser, and I'm not really a diehard plotter either. But what I did come up with was a general arc of where I wanted the story to go. My original incorrect assumption was that I was going to write one long novel and tell the story beginning to ending, and like Mists of Avalon, and it didn't wind up that way. I wound up having to break it up into 3 just because of the length that it got to. But yeah, I had a general arc, a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and, well, that's a trilogy.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so now the only problem then was I had to figure out a beginning, a middle, and ending of each part of the trilogy.
You're right. Now that you're going to break it up, you're like, okay, now I have the 3 mini-stories.
Exactly. So I knew where my character was starting, and I knew where she was going to end. And the challenge was to figure out the in-between, but leave myself room for some creativity, because what I didn't want to do was just plug in all my blanks and then just fill in a little bit in between and stitch it all together.
Right. The reader would be like, well, that was boring.
Well, yeah, that's what I was afraid of doing, so I left myself a lot of room for that creativity that I felt I was so starved from. And in the end, what happened was I wrote the arc kind of on the fly, kind of making up a middle point, and it moves around a little bit. It's like taking a road trip where you're leaving Los Angeles and you're going to arrive in Philadelphia, but where you go in between, I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah, exactly. There's a specific path to get from here to there, but there's a lot of stops along the way that you can pick.
Yeah, and I had to do some because I kind of had my middle that I knew I wanted. I had to do some course corrections, of course, to kind of meet that middle and fulfill everything else in between. But that's kind of how it worked.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And so you've now got book 1 and book 2 of your trilogy done, out, and published. They can pick them up now. I've got the links below. So if you're watching this embedded on another website, just click on the button over there that says watch on YouTube. And in the description down below, I have got Guy's books on Amazon. So I've got the link for the Amazon, which shows the first 2 books that are already out. And then I've also to connect with Guy so you can see when the 3rd book comes out, when does that 3rd one? How is that going?
Oh, I'm in a draft 2A stage on that right now, and I'm anticipating sometime next fall, perhaps.
Excellent, excellent. So next fall, so that you don't forget that there's a new book coming, you can connect with Guy on his Facebook page. I've got the link down below, his Goodreads page. And then there's also a Facebook page for the Dragon's Treasure trilogy. And I've got all those links down below, so you can go and like it. And then that way you can get the feed when the book starts to come out and he starts throwing hints out, doing cover reveals, all that fun stuff. for the publishing side. And then that way you know when the trilogy is done. And then after, so you've been working on this one for a few years now.
Oh, I want to say I started it in '09. I think was I first started writing, and it's what was it? It was 2013 when I finally felt I was done enough with Forgotten Princess that I put that out.
Yeah.
And then started concentrating on 2 and 3.
I've said before, books are never finished; they're only published.
I know. I don't like going back and rereading lots of it because then I find myself with the urge to, I can fix that.
I can update that. This would be better.
Exactly, yeah. And that's part of the reason why it took me I had intended to release one book each year, like a Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings thing.
Right.
You know, each summer I wanted to release a successive book. And that didn't happen because as I started to finalize book 2, which I had almost completed as I released Forgotten Princess of Mona, I realized that I was getting into a point where, and I'd already done it a little bit with Forgotten Princess of Mona, by releasing that before finishing A Cold White Home, I realized that I kind of painted myself into a couple of corners.
Oh, no.
So I learned from that lesson, and everything works. I'm happy to say that everything works.
You made it work out.
and it works to my satisfaction, which is even better. But I did learn from that experience that before I self-published A Cold White Home, I really wanted to have at least a draft 1 of book 3, which is tentatively titled Memories So Distant and Brief Yet Evergreen.
Oh, nice.
It may get shorter.
We'll call it Evergreen. There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, I realized that, and it took me a long time to get through that draft 1 of book 3, regardless of whatever title it winds up going by.
And then that way you were able to go into book 2 and make any changes and tweaks.
Correct. And it really turned out to be a fairly, pat myself on the back, wise decision on my part, because I did find myself having a lot of issues between 2 and 3. So the extra year wait, I hope, is worth it to everybody who does read Cold White Home. Well, because now 3 is going to hook up seamlessly.
Perfect. And so you've been working on these for a long time now. Yes. What's next from the great Guy Donovan? After this series is done, you're just going to fall into a pit of despair. All this time is now over. Have you got anything planned for the next?
It is hard because I've lived with Karis and the other characters in this trilogy for so long, and they are so real in my own head. Finishing that first draft of book 3 was almost like a death in the family kind of thing. Yeah. It was a little cathartic. Really.
The published book is the tombstone.
A little bit, yeah, and luckily I'm not bereft of any other ideas. The odd thing is that my first foray into actual writing, and because I've been writing all my life, just as a Star Wars nerd in the 70s, doing fan fictions and whatnot, and other ideas that are all just utter garbage that never deserve to see the light of day. But now that I've taken that step into it, the odd thing is that I've chosen my first steps to be not only a massive trilogy, but also a fantasy trilogy, because I am a lifelong hard sci-fi fan. Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, those guys. And I think I've devoted so much of my time in my life and neglected so much of my real life due to 5th century Britannia. I think I'm going to jump into the future.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to go hard sci-fi in an Arthur Clarke vein.
Excellent. That'll be good. That'll be good. Yeah, yes, with all the greats all disappearing on us, we need more of that.
I hope I can kind of hide in their shadow a little bit.
Excellent. Well, I have hit on all the questions that I had here. So before we wrap up this interview, is there anything else that you would like the people who are watching, current readers, potential readers, anything you'd like them to know?
Wow, that's a challenge. Tell a guy who's reluctant to sell himself to sell himself.
There you go. That's what I'm doing.
I suppose what I would like to do is just encourage people to give it a try. The Dragon's Treasure is what I'm referring to, of course, because that's what I have for you to try. But I do know that it's a long trilogy. It rivals the Outlander books in length. I do like to point out the Outlander books are still longer than mine, and those sell well. So give me a try. But it's an epic story. It covers the length and breadth of the entire island of Britannia.
Wow.
The first book is largely confined to Anglesey, or Mona in my terms. But books 2 and 3 open it up to the entire British Isles, with the exception of Ireland, though they're always a boogeyman off to the side. Um, it's a big, broad story, and it's also rooted, despite its epic breadth, I guess, it's rooted in very small characters that are, confused about their places in the world, and it's largely a coming of age story of my main character, who goes from 11 in the beginning and ends the trilogy, ends the main body of the trilogy at 17. So it's a big period in her life, and it's a big period in all of Britannia that precedes the Arthurian legend. So give it a try. If you don't like long books, you don't like long books. But
you know what? If you don't like long books, read it in short spurts.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Because if you read 10 short books, why didn't you just read one long one, huh?
Sure. I suppose I could break it up into 50 different parts, but I like the trilogy.
Here you go. Serialized.
There you go.
Like Victorian era.
Oh, it worked for Green Mile, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It sure did. But yeah, so it's great that you did this big backdrop epic fantasy, but it was really a very personal story for your main character.
At its heart, it's a very intimate story about a little girl trying to find her place in a world that doesn't want her in it.
Right. Doesn't want her at all. So excellent. Mm-hmm. Good job, Guy.
Oh, thank you.
Very, very pleased. So thank you so very much for coming on the show and letting ODNT shine the spotlight on you and your work. And we definitely would love to have you back when book 3 comes out.
Well, thank you. It'd be my pleasure.
Yes, so we'll have you promote that, and then that way you'll have the trilogy complete, and we'll be able to promote that for you and everything. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and switch on over. So don't hang up on me just yet. We'll chat for a couple more minutes. So that was Guy Donovan, and the book 2, A Cold White Home, and of course book 1, The Forgotten Princess of Mona, was the one you want to start with, which is a big, epic, sweeping fantasy tale that covers the British Isles in 5th century. So it's also historical fantasy, and we already know, the spoiler alert by the little title here, there's dragons involved. We always can use more dragons in our stories. So definitely go ahead and check that out. I have the link down below for Guy's books on Amazon. Just click that link and you'll see his books there. And you can check them out. Right now he's got them on ebook and at a really good value price. So you definitely get a big bang for your buck picking up Guy's books. So once again, I'm Steve DeWinter. We had with us Guy Donovan, our special guest today. And thank you very much for watching. Join the ODN team and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We have many more authors, artists, guests, musicians, actors, all sorts of people coming to our show. And we'd love to share them with you. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.